Today, I'm very excited to be finishing together with you Masechet Yoma, Daf Pechet. If you're joining our Zoom Siyum on Sunday, July 11th, then you don't need to listen to this class because we're going to be learning it together. But if you want to finish it today, here is today's class. So, and for those of you who are listening at some future point, obviously you will be listening to today's class. Also, for those interested, the Siyum and all the other shiurim that are going on at the Siyum will all be up on our site after the Siyum, probably sometime on Monday. So feel free to listen then if you can't make it to the Siyum. We're going to start at the bottom of Pei Zayin Amud Bet, Amar Rav, 5 lines from the bottom. We finished up with this yesterday, but we'll go back for a quick minute. I want to mention something from the previous class, which is we saw all different opinions about what the vidoy is, the confession. So if you look at the sheet from yesterday, I forgot to mention it, but I put on the sheet all the different places where one could find that prayer. Okay, the different options that were given, many of them found their way into our texts, into our prayers in some point at some kind of prayer. You'll see all of that is in the sheet. So if you want to look there to see. Amar Rav, Tfilat Ni'ilah poteret et shel arvit. So Rav said that, if you remember, there was Machloket Rav and Shmuel. Is Ni'ilah an entire prayer, Shemona Esrei, a regular prayer, or is it just a small prayer like Me Anu Mechayenu? Who are we? What are we? Right? And the idea of Ni'ilah is we're kind of, as we said yesterday, picking up our hands and saying, we've done everything we can do. Now it's in your hands, God, and up to you. So according to Rav, Ni'ilah exempts us from Arvit, to which the Gemara said, that it makes sense, Rav L'Tameh, because he said it's lo tiyaterata, it's a whole prayer, and because it's got a Shemon Esrei, kevan detzalile tu lo tzarich, since he already prayed, he doesn't need to pray again. But then the Gemara questions, and it's a very strange thing for us to think that Ni'ilah could exempt you from Arvit. It seems very strange. We're going to get back to this in another minute. Umi amar Rav hachi, did Rav really say this? Didn't Rav say halacha k'divreya omer tfilat Arvit l'shut? Doesn't he say Arvit is only optional? So you didn't need to say this. So we answered the Divrei HaOmer Chova Kama. He was talking to, according to those who say it's an obligation. So first of all, Tosfot on this page talks about and it also goes back to Brachot, where there was a machloket, is Tfilat Arvit L'shut or Chova, is it obligatory or voluntary? And Tosfot says it's very strange. It can't really be voluntary. It doesn't make any sense that Arvit would be a voluntary prayer. And Tosfot basically says, I'm about 8 lines down in Tosfot, or there's only unique circumstances where you really can't do it. Even though it's really optional, it doesn't really mean it's optional. The question is, what is this? And if it's optional, and for that really optional, and even if you say it's chovah, Arvit seems to have a bit of a different nature. But Moshe Lichtenstein, in a shiur of his, can be found in Yu Torah, he talks about this idea of Arvit being a prayer that has a different nature than the other prayers. Now, why is it different? So whether you say tefillot in place of avot or in place of korbanot, either which way, Arvit has a bit of a different nature. If you look at the tefillot, the korbanot, there's the tamid shel shachar and the tamid shel bein arbaim, the daily offering in the morning and the afternoon. What's nighttime, right? That's shacharit and mincha. What about nighttime? So that was just for the parts that got burnt on the altar. So it already has a bit of a different nature. If you say avot, so Avram and Yitzchak kind of went out to look to God and pray to him. But Yaakov was praying from a place of struggling and please, right? He was desperate. It's a bit of a different type of prayer. And it could be, if you think about this idea of desperate, this is what we discussed Ni'ilah is all about. It's saying we're putting up our hands. There's nothing we can do anymore. We're totally leaving it up to you, God, because we've done what we can. And maybe that's the idea, that the concept of Ni'ilah is very similar to the concept of Arvit. So maybe one can make that connection. Anyway, continuing on in the Gemara, Meitive. Now we're going to bring a question against Rav. We said that Tfilah Ni'ilah exempts Arvit. Or Yom Kippurim, and by the way, one thing we mentioned last class is that there's an assumption that a Ni'ilah here must be done at night. And we're going to come back to this idea that Ni'ilah, right? Most people make sure to do Ni'ilah when it's still daytime. But according to Rav, it seems like they did Ni'ilah at night. Otherwise, it wouldn't exempt you from Arvit, from the nighttime prayer. Meitive. Now we're bringing a contradiction. Or Yom Kippurim, on Yom Kippurim, Erev Yom Kippur, mitpalel sheva u'mitvadeh, meaning the night of Yom Kippur, the first night, or the night before. Shacharit sheva u'mitvadeh, then in the morning, you again What is 7? 7 blessings of the Shemona Esrei. On a holiday, right? It's only 7, 3 in the beginning, 3 in the end, and the 1 in the middle. Musaf Sheva Mutadeh. So Musaf, it's another 7, and then you do the Vidoy. Ne'ilah Mitpalel Sheva Mutadeh. Ne'ilah, you do 7 blessings, and you do the confession. Arvit Mitpalel Sheva Me'en Shmona Esrei. When it comes to Arvit, you daven 7 blessings. Me'en Shmona Esrei. This is a prayer called Havinenu, the short prayer. We learned about it in Brachot. People would say if they were on the way somewhere, didn't have time. And it's all the middle blessings get stuck into one. And it's a very short blessing. And why do we do that on, let's say, Yom Kippur, according to this opinion? Because we want to hurry up and finish. People want to eat, so we make it short. Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel disagrees. He says, Mishum Avotav, in the name of his fathers, Mitpalel Shmonas Shleimot. You actually do 18 full blessings. Why is that? You have to add the blessing of Havdalah, which is a special prayer that we add every Saturday night and after holidays in the first of the middle brachot. You can't add that in Havinenu, so therefore you have to say the full Shemona Esrei. Either which way we look at it, whether you look at that opinion or the previous opinion, all of them think that you daven Ne'ilah and then you daven Arvit. That goes clearly against Rav. So the answer is Tanahi. It's actually a debate among Tanaim. How do we know this is a Tanaitic debate? And for this, we're going to get a bit of sidetracked into this idea of when one goes to the mikvah on Yom Kippur, can one, we saw different cases where someone could go through the water, could get washed, right? Could go through a river. What about going to a mikvah on Yom Kippur? So, Ditanya, how do we know it's a machloket Tanaim here? As it says in the following brayta. Kol chayavei tefilot tovlin kidarkam b'Yom Kippurim. Anyone who's chayav to go to a mikvah does it the way one would normally do it on Yom Kippur, meaning you're obligated to go to the mikvah even on Yom Kippur. Nida v'yoledet tovlot kidarkam b'leilei Yom Kippurim. So a nida, and a woman who gave birth, who normally goes to the mikvah at night, they're the only ones who go at night. They can go, if they're supposed to go to the mikvah on Erev Yom Kippur, the night of Yom Kippur, they can go then. But this is seemingly surprising. We don't do this nowadays. We'll get back to that. Someone who has a seminal emission cannot pray. So therefore, he can go any time of day until when? Until mincha time. Once mincha comes, he no longer needs to pray anymore. So this would imply what? What about Ne'ilah? So it must be Ne'ilah at night. If Ne'ilah is at night, then one could say it exempts you from Arvit. That's Rav's opinion. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Kolayom Kulo, he can go to the mikvah all day long because he still might be saying Ne'ilah, and therefore, right, even after mincha, you can still go because of Ne'ilah, which shows that Ne'ilah was during the day, which means that clearly Rabbi Yossi doesn't think that Ne'ilah could exempt you from Arvit. So that resolves our issue with Rav. He seemed to disagree with that Tanaitic source. Don't worry, he has another Tana that he can hold by. Remember, as long as you can have some other Tanaitic source, then it's okay. Now we're going to have a question. We're going to bring another contradiction. This is a contradiction not on Rav. It's against this Braita. We just saw the Braita. And in the Braita, Tanakama said you can go to the mikvah. Someone who has a seminal emission can go until mincha. Rabbi Yossi says you can go all day long. We're going to have a Braita where the exact opposite appears. Hazav v'hazava. Okay, hazav, someone who has gonorrhea, hazava, a woman who has unusual bleeding, not during her menstruation. Hamitzora v'amitzora, a leper, male or female. Uboel nida, someone who sleeps with a woman while she's in nida. Utmemeit, someone who becomes impure to a dead person. Tovlin kedarkam b'Yom Kippurim. They go to the mikvah normally on Yom Kippur, even though it's Yom Kippur, they go to the mikvah. Nida v'yoledet tovlo kedarkam b'leilei Yom Kippurim. They go Yom Kippur night. Right? What's strange about the nida and the yoledet is usually they go to the mikvah in order to allow them to be together with their husbands, but they're not going to be allowed to be because tashmish hamitah is forbidden. Sexual relations are forbidden on Yom Kippur. So we'll talk about this in a minute. Now, first of all, you might say, well, in those days there were tumah and tara, right? There was all sorts of things they might touch that would become impure, so one could see why. Okay, but maybe we'll see another reason as well. Now, according to Tanakama, all day long. We don't have to worry that this contradicts the previous Tanakama because maybe it's not the same Tanakama. But Tanakama just means the person who disagrees with the person who we see who has a name in the Mishnah or the Braita. Rabbi Yossi says, Mina mincha ulamara ein yachol litbo. From mincha, though, one cannot go to the mikveh, he says. That is exactly against Rabbi Yossi that we saw in the first Braita. So Rabbi Yossi in the first Braita says all day. And Rabbi Yossi in the second Braita says only till Mincha. How do we explain that? So the Gemara says, Lo kasha, hadit sali tefillah nila, hadilot sali. If you've already davened Ne'ilah, then you can't go to the mikveh anymore. That's what Rabbi Yossi said, only till Mincha. But if you didn't daven yet Ne'ilah, then you can go all day long till you daven Ne'ilah, and that would be the first Braita. Okay? So that makes a lot of sense. However, there's something that doesn't make sense at all in that. Idit saleh. Now, Rabbi Yossi said, if you already prayed, then you can't go, right? That's the last one. Ein yachol litbol min hamincha. No more, because you already prayed Ne'ilah. But idit saleh, my time I have the Rabbanan. If you already prayed, then why did the rabbis say, if you already prayed Ne'ilah, we're assuming the second Braita is talking about a case where you already prayed Ne'ilah. If he already prayed Ne'ilah, then what does he need this for? I'm sorry, why is he allowed to go to the mikveh according to the rabbis? He doesn't need the mikveh at all. It's because the rabbis hold it's a mitzvah to go to the mikveh on time. What does it mean on time? It means you're about carry, you go to the mikveh immediately. So therefore, it's a mitzvah to go immediately, even if there's no real ramifications, even if you don't need it for the next prayer because you don't have another prayer anymore. Still, you get to go because of this idea of tefillah b'zman mitzvah. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. If Tanakama of the second Braita holds tefillah b'zman mitzvah, and Rabbi Yossi disagrees, what does he disagree about? It must be he holds tefillah b'zman is not a mitzvah. Right? There's no issue here that you're supposed to go to the mikveh exactly on time. That's not a thing according to him. So that's what we're going to assume right now. Rabbi Yossi savar lav mitzvah. We'll get back to this idea about why tefillah b'zman a mitzvah or not. Hold off. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. V'hatanya, there's a Braita that says, and we learned this already a few times. We learned it here in the beginning of our Masechet. Harei shaya shem katuv al b'saro. If God's name was written on your skin, harei ze lo yerchatz v'lo yasuch v'lo yamo b'mkom hatinok. You can't wash it off. You can't anoint your skin because what will happen? You'll erase God's name. You're not allowed to erase God's name. So therefore, if you have God's name written on you, you can't, notice the words. There's going to be a few literary things going on here. Yerchatz v'lo yasuch, exactly our rechitza and sicha from the 5 afflictions that one can't do. And you can't stand in a place that's very dirty because it's God's name, right? Like a place where there's feces or something. You don't want to be standing there with God's name on you. It's a disgrace to God's name. Nizdamna lo tfilat mitzvah. What if you're supposed to go to the mikvah? Are you allowed to go to the mikvah? So according to Tanakama, korech alav gemi v'yoreh v'toveh. You have to put something over it, and then you can go in the mikvah, because at least you're either preventing it from actually coming off, or you're at least showing that I'm concerned for the fact that God's name is here, and therefore you put something on. You can't go to the mikvah if you don't do that. Rabbi Yossi omer yoreh v'toveh kedarko b'vad shelo yishakshek. You can go to the mikvah, no problem, as long as you don't rub it off. If you start rubbing it while you're under the water, it'll rub off. Then you're actively causing God's name to be erased. If you're just going because you have to go to the mikvah, that's a different story. The kaimala, and it was talked about this source that the tefillah b'zman a mitzvah plige. The machloket was about, is tefillah b'zman a mitzvah or not? That's the machloket. Rabbi Yossi says you don't have to go finding a gemi. Go right away. Tefillah b'zman. It's time to go to the mikvah. Go down. And if you can't find, according to Tanakama, you have to go find a gemi. If you can't find a gemi, a reed to wrap around it, you can't go to the mikvah until you find it. Obviously, they think tefillah b'zman is not a mitzvah. Don't have to go on time. Therefore, push it off until you come up with a solution for this issue. So what do we see here? Rabbi Yossi here seems to say tefillah b'zman is a mitzvah. And in our Braita, we said, Tanakama holds tefillah b'zman a mitzvah, but Rabbi Yossi disagrees. He must think it's not a mitzvah. And that's why he says, once mincha time comes, if you've already davened Ne'ilah, you can't go to the mikvah because there's no reason. So how do we resolve this? The easiest answer, Hahi Rabbi Yossi bar Yehudi. Titania Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda Omer. We see from a different source, actually a very complicated case. I'm not going to get into the details, but it's a case that comes up in Nida about a woman who has a bunch of doubts about what day she's supposed to go to the mikvah. She had, if I remember correctly, she has a miscarriage, and she's not sure if she miscarried a boy or a girl. She's not sure if it was even something that she, forget all the details, if she was in her Zava days or not. She needs to wait 7 clean days. she has all sorts of possibilities about what days she goes to the mikveh. And according to some opinions, she has to go to the mikveh every time that it's a possibility that that's the night, because tefillah is mana mitzvah. But Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says, all she has to do is go the last day, because anyway, she's in doubt that maybe she needs to go that day. So she has to be in her tamei, impure status until then anyway. Just go the last day, because there's no such thing as tefillah b'zman mitzvah, or it's not that important. So therefore, what do you see here? The Rabbi Yossi that we were discussing is a different Rabbi Yossi. And this Rabbi Yossi is Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. And therefore, it's not the same person. Don't try to bring me a contradiction of Rabbi Yossi, when these are different Rabbi Yossis. Okay, now, before we move on to the last part of today's daf and last part of our Masechet, which is a bit of a strange way to end, I want to talk about this idea of tefillah b'zman mitzvah. So I found an article by Rav Avram Stav, who writes about, he wrote in Daf Yomi, which is a column in the Yeshivat Har Etzion website, and he wrote about these two ways to view tefillah b'zman mitzvah. He suggests one way is to view it is to say it's a mitzvah, right? You have a special time that you're supposed to go to the mikveh. That's your time. You're supposed to do things on time. Okay, it's based on in the Gemara on Daf Chet in our Masechet, where it talks about tefillah b'zman mitzvah also, and it brings in our whole case. And actually, I'm not going to say, but there's a bit of a debate about whether they actually disagree about tefillah b'zman mitzvah or not. Some people say that's not the debate between them, kind of ruin today's sugya, because that's what we said it is the debate, but there it seems to say it's not the debate. But in any case, there Rashi says tefillah b'zman mitzvah, because it says in the Pasukim Bamidbar Yutet, when it talks about the Para Aduma, v'chit'o b'yom hashvi'i v'chides b'gadav v'rachatz. Okay, you purify yourself by Yom HaShvi'i on the seventh day, and you wash your clothes, v'rachatz. So there you see, you do it on that day. It's a special mitzvah to do it on that day. So that's one way to understand. There's a mitzvah and it's a special mitzvah to do it on that day. But another option is you have tumah on you. Tumah is considered something, we don't like to use the word dirty, but something that you want to get rid of. So you want to get rid of it as quickly as possible. Tefillah b'zman mitzvah is not, I want to purify myself. I'm not looking at, let's say, the positive. I want to get rid of whatever is weighing me down, that impurity. I want to get rid of it as quickly as possible. Now, what's a possible nafkamina, a difference between these two opinions? So one good example is nowadays. Now, and there's actually a machloket about this, whether we still hold by this. Yom Kippur, for example, we don't do this anymore. We don't go to the mikveh on Yom Kippur night. If you're supposed to go to the mikveh Yom Kippur night, you push it off and you go on Motzei Yom Kippur. So some people say it's because tefillah b'zman mitzvah is no longer true nowadays. Why is it no longer true? Because if you hold it's to get rid of the impurity, then we want to get rid of it as quickly as possible. And we would say we would go. But if you hold that if the mitzvah is supposed to be done in its appropriate time, we actually don't do tefillah anymore in its right time, because tefillah in the Torah for nida is the 7 days that you're impure, that you're bleeding. And then you're done, you go to the mikveh right after those 7 days. We add 7 clean days, and that's the whole thing. If you don't know that yet, we'll learn it when we get to Masechet Nida, a long time till then. But there's this issue of it's no longer bismanah, so therefore it's less of an issue. Therefore, we're not necessarily going to allow you to do it. Okay, there's other possible reasons that are given as to why we don't do it anymore. Maybe also because in those days it was taharot. There were things that they were touching that it was relevant for. Nowadays, that's not relevant, so it's another reason possibly not to. Okay, so right, Tosfot says that tefillah b'zman is no longer a mitzvah because he holds it has to do with the mitzvah, whereas the Torah still thinks that tefillah b'zman is a mitzvah nowadays. So he would hold that it's because we're trying to get rid of the impurity. We want to get rid of it as quickly as possible. I was thinking about this idea. You could take it to Yom Kippur, right? We're finishing the Masechet. I want to kind of tie in a bunch of ideas. Yom Kippur is a day that is meant for atonement. Now, atonement could be viewed in different ways. Atonement could be viewed as, I want to purify myself. I want to come out of this, right, in a positive way. I want to change, I want to change things. I want to look almost like looking forward. I want purity. I want to have purity. I want to have a good life. I want to do things in the proper way. Part of Yom Kippur is kind of your resolutions for the upcoming year. But part of it is, I want to get rid of the sins, right? The vidoy, the confession, the tshuva. I want to get rid of all my sins. And that's another element of it. These are kind of two different ways to view Yom Kippur. Is it a heavy day that we're burdened by all of our sins in the past and we want to get rid of them? Or is it more looking toward the future of, I want to be purified. I want to be a different person. I want to live my life in a different way. I want to think about what I can do today that can make my life different. So I think these two views of Tefillah B'zman Mitzvah is also kind of two different ways of looking at Tshuva and Yom Kippur and what the purposes of Yom Kippur is. Okay, so that's an idea. Let's move on now, and then we'll wrap everything up at the end. Tanu Rabbanan. I warned you a little bit. This is going to be a little bit strange way to end the Masechet. Although we're going to talk about seeing Keri, which is having a seminal emission. And if you remember, this is often the Masechet ends with what it started with. 7 days before Yom Kippur, we separate the Kohen Gadol because he might have a seminal emission if he's living with his wife. So we separate him from his wife so that he doesn't have a seminal emission and become impure. And likewise, like there were other things about impurity with him, but also here, we want to avoid everybody really from having Keri, right? That's why also we refrain from Tashmish Hamitah, because if you have sexual relations, you by nature see you have Keri, the man has Keri, he needs to go to the mikveh. So it says here, Tanu Rabbanan. So imagine, right, you're trying to avoid this. You separate from your wife the night of Yom Kippur, right? You don't have sexual relations. And then what happens? Haro'eh Keri b'Yom Kippurim. So now you see Keri. What do? You have a seminal emission. Yored v'tovel. Okay, I'm now talking, this is all male because this isn't relevant for females, but you go to the mikveh, ula erev yeshavshet. And at night, you should clean your body off. So the Gemara says, first of all, if you remember, we just had the yeshavshet. Right? That he won't wash it off when he goes into the mikveh to wash off the name of God. So again, another literary connection that's connecting with sugyot. In the evening, he should wipe it off. So the Gemara says, first of all, they assume wipe off so you don't have a chatzitza when you go to the mikveh. So the Gemara says it makes no sense. La'erev, my dahava. What do you mean? You already went to the mikveh. Now in the evening, you should wipe off something so it's not a chatzitza, a separation, a barrier between you and the water, but you already went to the mikveh. What's done was done. What it means is the night before, you should wipe, before Yom Kippur starts, you should clean your body well. Women who go to the mikveh know this. We clean our bodies very well before we go to the mikveh to make sure there's nothing going to separate there's no barrier between you and the water. This is telling you that you should go the night before, the day before, when you're Erev Yom Kippur, wash your body really well. Now you haven't seen Keri yet. You haven't had a seminal emission. Just in case you might have a seminal emission, prepare yourself. Now, you can't help but say, this fits into the theme that we've been discussing throughout the Masechet, that there's all of these things, starting with the 7 days before Yom Kippur. We prepare and prepare and prepare, right? To try to avoid or try to foresee what situation could possibly happen. So here you have it. Before Yom Kippur, make sure to wash your body really well so that if you have a seminal emission and you have to go to the mikveh, your body's already clean. Okay, that's the first thing. Now we have more interesting. Now, before I even finish, someone who sees Keri on Yom Kippur. Now, this is clearly not going to be a good thing, right? You don't want any seminal emission. You don't want to become tamei. You can't daven. You're supposed to do on Yom Kippur. You're supposed to pray, right? You have to go to the mikveh, which maybe we're allowed to, but we don't really want to be in a situation where we have to go in the mikveh if we can avoid it on Yom Kippur. So, and I would imagine if it were me, right, I would see it as a sign of a sign from God, right? This is something involuntary. It happened to me. I didn't mean for it to happen. And I would look at this as, oh no, right? Very bad sign that I wake up Yom Kippur morning with a seminal emission. So I can use myself as an example, even though I'm female, but right, trying to put myself in a man's shoes. So now, what is this bright to say? If you see Keri b'Yom Kippurim, avonotav mechulin lo. Your sins are forgiven. Wow, that seems like it's a good thing. Seems very strange. Torah is definitely, the Gemara in general isn't pro having seminal emission. So that's the first thing. Gemara asks, wait a minute, isn't there a brighter that says your avonot, if you see Keri on Yom Kippur, your avonot are organized for you, meaning they're all set up, they're all lined up, kind of in a line. Here's my sin, here's my sin, here's my sin. It's a bad thing. So the Gemara answers, no, you misunderstood. My sturim limachel. They're organized so that you become forgiven for all of them, pardoned for them. Again, very strange. Why is this seen as a good thing? Kind of debate. Rabbi Yishmael, in the house of Rabbi Yishmael, it was taught how Ho'eh Keri b'Yom Kippurim yid'ad kol hashana kula. Oh, now we're getting a little negative, right? The Gemara says, if you see Keri in Yom Kippur, you better be worried all year long, meaning this could be a very bad sign. However, wait for the second part. V'im al talo shana, but if the year passes and nothing happened to you, muvtach lo shehu ben olam haba. You're promised a way, you're going to the world to come. Why? Because it must be you have enough good things going for you. Yes, it's a bad thing. But the fact that you didn't get punished means that you must have a lot of zchuyot, a lot of merits that stood up for you. And therefore, you must be going to the world to come. Here's the most strange line of the entire section. You should know, if this happens to you, the entire world is thirsty and you are satiated. What does this mean? First of all, it goes back to our Ra'av, right? When the Saveh that we talked about in terms of the Inuyim and all sorts of things, those themes came up before about satiated and famine, and hungry, ravenous. What does this mean? This means that everybody else is refraining from sexual relations. Now, you haven't had sexual relations, but you had an action that was sexual in nature and kind of a release. So what it's saying is everybody else is thirsting for this because they're all in Enoi. They're afflicting themselves by refraining. And you're not. You're satiated. Now, satiated is viewed usually as a positive thing. In other words, now, how is this viewed? So some of the commentaries say this is a sign from God that you don't need the afflictions. This is fascinating. But the afflictions are a means to an end. They're a way to get you to atonement, but maybe you don't even need it. Maybe you can get to atonement even without afflicting yourself. Now, it's not to say you can go eat and drink, right? But it's to say that obviously this holding back was not necessary for you. Again, the whole thing is quite odd. Last line we're going to read, and then we'll try to make sense of this whole thing. Ki ata Rabdimi amar, ma pishchaye sage umasi. When Rabdimi came from Israel, he said about this kind of person, it is said, he will live a long life and he will grow and raise others. Okay? What they say is Rashi says it comes from Pasuk. Yir'eh zera ya'arich yamim. It's a Pasuk from Mishayahu. You'll see zera. If you see zera, which means if you have a seminal emission, ya'arich hayim, you'll have a long life. And some people say Yarbeh zera also means you'll have a lot of children. Okay, this is seen as a good sign. And with that, Hadron alach Yom Kippurim uslik ala Masechet Yoma. So we finished the parak Yom Kippurim, and we're done with Masechet Yoma. Now, I'm not going to do the Hadrons now. I'm going to do that together at the Siyum on Sunday. But I want to talk a little bit about the ending of this Masechet, which is really very strange. But I want to show you how this fits in with a lot of the themes we've been seeing throughout about interpersonal relations, about how to handle things, about how to deal with unexpected circumstances, right? Now, if you think about it, what we talked about in the temple, right? The Shiur dies and the Kohen, you can imagine, right? The Kohen Gadol is sitting there on Yom Kippur, he does all the preparations possible, and the goat drops dead in the middle of the temple. Could you imagine his shock and how, right? He's clearly thinking, this is a sign from God, this is not good, right? And then there was a debate, what does he have to do? From where does he have to start again? Can he pick up from where he left off, right? All different possibilities about how to progress from there. Here, this is no different. Here you have a person all ready to daven on Yom Kippur, and all of a sudden, seminal emission, right? Again, oh my God, there's what to do with this, but terrible sign from God. How did this happen to me, right? It wasn't my fault. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't make any sort of mistake, or maybe something could have led to it, but still, he's not really responsible. But on the other hand, it's really bad. And now he has to go to the mikvah and all that. It's complicated. Now he has a way to fix it. And I think what this sugya is coming to tell you is that life is about fixing problems. And he's standing here right now on Yom Kippur, and he could take this and get totally depressed and think, this is the end. Sign from God, I'm doomed. This is it, right? No kavanah anymore in his davening, can't concentrate, right? All he's thinking about is, look at the bad situation that I'm in. But what they're telling you is, no. This can be a good thing. We just learned the other day that if you repent, your sins turn into merits, and that you can take this and turn it into something good. It's all about your attitude. When something bad happens and you take it and you learn from it and you improve from it, you're a better person as a result. And I think that the Masechet is ending specifically on this point. And maybe you might say, look, this book in general, mostly men were reading it. And this is something that's a very central issue in a halachic man's life, if you're living at the time of, where purity and impurity laws were very serious, this was probably something that came up very often. And for this person, right, this is very scary. And I think what they're telling you is, no, don't get scared by it. Don't get daunted. Yes, it's possible this is a bad sign, but you have the power to change it. You have the power to turn this into something good. Your merits will help you. Your actions, how you deal with things, will affect how it gets dealt with, how you get dealt with. And I think it's a very interesting place for the Masechah to end, even though it's a kind of difficult sugya to swallow. But the concept behind it and the ideas are very, very much things that we can relate and bring to our everyday life, and to think about, what does this mean for me? And how can I make my Yom Kippur a more meaningful day? And, this idea, by the way, I also want to say about Tefillah B'zman HaMitzvah, and do we view it as there's a special time? Do we view, I was thinking also Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, right? The time to do tshuva is Yom Kippur. But really the time to do tshuva is any day. The whole idea is to get rid of the tumah, let's say, the impurity or the sins. That should be something we should be doing on a daily basis. So it's also a little bit of, is there a set time for it? Or can it be done at any time? And it's not necessarily a time-related issue. And tefillah in general, we talk about how Hashem is mikveh tahara, right? He is our mikveh on Yom Kippur. And right, we saw that verse before. He is our purification. So there's all this connection at the end, the idea of tefillah and how God is purifying us. And does it only happen on Yom Kippur? Can it happen on a regular day, right? Is there a set time, or could it be any time? And obviously we all believe that it could be any time, right? We don't say wait till Yom Kippur to do repentance, right? Do it today. If you're ready to do it today, go for it. So these are all concepts that we could take from here to our daily lives. And with that, I wish you, we have Yom Kippur coming up, not so far off in the Jewish calendar, a meaningful Yom Kippur, and we will meet up together in Masechet Sukkah in the next class. So Mazal Tov, I'm finishing the Masechet, and I hope if you didn't make it to the Siyum, I hope you'll watch the Siyum for the other Shiurim. If you listen to this, you can fast forward the beginning of the Siyum and listen to the other Shiurim that we have. Have a great day.